Startle Reflex. A door slams behind you. Your eyes blink, your shoulders jump, and your muscles tighten before you even know what happened. That is the startle reflex, a defensive burst designed to buy the nervous system time. Sudden sound activates fast circuits in the lower brainstem, which sends signals to the muscles around the eyes, neck, shoulders, and limbs. The blink often begins in the orbicularis oculi, but the reaction can spread through the body like one alarm locking several doors at once. Here is the part people miss. The response is not controlled by volume alone. If you already feel unsafe, the same sound can trigger a larger jump. If the sound is expected, the reaction may shrink. The brain is not just measuring noise, it is estimating threat. A phenomenon called pre-pulse inhibition shows this clearly. When a small, harmless signal appears just before a loud sound, the startle response is often reduced. That tiny warning gives the brain a moment to filter what is coming, like a guard recognizing a visitor before the gate is forced open. Stress can turn that filter down. Ordinary sounds feel sharper, sleep breaks more easily, and the body keeps preparing for danger that never arrives. That does not mean you are weak. It may mean the alarm system has been trained to expect too much. Better sleep, lower background stress, and gradual exposure to predictable triggers can help it recalibrate. The startle reflex does not wait to understand the danger. It prepares you first. But the next reflex is even more precise. It can choose exactly which muscles pull you away from pain. Withdrawal reflex. Your hand touches a hot pan and snaps back before the pain fully reaches awareness. That is the withdrawal reflex, a protective spinal circuit built to move first and explain later. Pain-sensitive nociceptors detect possible tissue damage and send signals into the spinal cord. Interneurons then activate the flexor muscles that pull the limb away while suppressing the opposing extensor muscles. This is called reciprocal inhibition, and without it, both muscle groups would fight each other like two people pulling the same door in opposite directions. But the movement is not a simple backward jerk. The spinal cord can adjust which muscles contract, depending on where the danger appears. Touch the top of the foot, the side of the leg, or the sole, and the escape pattern changes to move the threatened area away from the stimulus. The brain still receives the pain signal, but by the time you consciously feel the burn, the rescue operation has already started. That speed matters because waiting for a deliberate decision could mean deeper tissue damage. Still, the reflex is not completely isolated from the brain. Attention, expectation, stress, and previous pain can change how strongly the circuit responds. That is why the same harmless touch may feel minor when you are relaxed, but trigger a larger reaction when your nervous system is already on alert. The useful response is simple. Move away first, then inspect what happened instead of forcing the limb back toward the source. Withdrawal saves the injured side by pulling it away. But if that limb is supporting your body, another reflex must instantly do the opposite. Or you fall. Crossed extensor reflex. The leg that escapes danger is only half the story. Step on something sharp and one side bends to pull away, while the opposite leg stiffens to keep your body from collapsing. This is the crossed extensor reflex, a spinal response that solves two problems at once. Protect the injured side and preserve balance. Sensory signals enter the spinal cord, then interneurons spread the command across several segments. On the threatened side, flexor muscles contract, while extensors relax. Across the body, the pattern reverses. Extensors activate and flexors are suppressed, turning the opposite leg into a temporary support column. It sounds like a simple left-right switch, but the circuit is more adaptable than that. During walking, the same stimulus can produce different responses, depending on where each leg is in the step cycle. A leg preparing to land needs a different correction from one already carrying weight. The nervous system can even reverse parts of the response when the usual pattern would make balance worse. Think of it less like a fixed emergency button and more like a railway junction changing tracks, while the train is still moving. This matters because withdrawal alone could save your foot and still send the rest of you to the ground. The crossed response keeps the escape coordinated, buying enough stability for the brain to take control of the next movement. But the next reflex protects something far more fragile. Touch one eye, and both eyelids may close. Corneal reflex, one eye senses the danger. Both eyes shut. The corneal reflex is a bilateral defense system built to protect one of the body's most exposed surfaces. When dust, an eyelash, or a sudden object approaches the cornea, sensory fibers in the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve carry the warning into the brainstem. Interneurons then distribute that signal to both facial nerves, which activate the orbicularis oculi muscles and close both eyelids. The surprising part is not the blink itself, it is the teamwork. A threat detected on one side produces a direct blink in that eye and a consensual blink in the other, as if one window sensor can close every shutter in the room. This makes the reflex useful far beyond eye protection. Clinicians can use it to test whether the trigeminal sensory pathway, facial motor pathway, and connecting brainstem circuits are still communicating. If sensation is lost, the alarm may never reach the control center. If the facial nerve is damaged, the warning arrives, but the eyelid on that side may fail to close. Blinking also spreads tears across the cornea, helping maintain a smooth optical surface and wash away small particles. Without that constant maintenance, the eye is like a camera lens left uncovered in a dust storm. But closing the eyelids is only one way the eyes defend themselves. The next reflex changes the size of the opening itself, using light as the trigger. Pupillary light reflex. Shine a light into one eye and the other pupil tightens too. That is the pupillary light reflex, a paired response that treats the eyes less like two separate cameras and more like one linked system. Light activates the retina, and the signal travels through the optic nerve toward the protectal area of the midbrain. From there, the message is sent to both Edinger-Westphal nuclei. Each side then sends parasympathetic fibers through the oculomotor nerve to the sphincter pupillae, shrinking both pupils at once. One beam, two doors closing, but the pupil is not reacting only to brightness. Specialized retinal ganglion cells containing melanopsin help sustain the response after the light appears, especially under strong illumination. That means the reflex is not just a quick camera aperture. It is part of a deeper light-sensing system connected to alertness and circadian timing. The direct response occurs in the illuminated eye. The consensual response happens in the opposite eye. That two-sided pattern gives clinicians a map. If one pupil fails to constrict, the location of the problem may lie in the sensory input, the midbrain connection, or the motor output. The reflex also protects the retina and improves visual clarity by reducing scattered light, like narrowing a spotlight to sharpen its beam. But pupils only control how much light enters. The next reflex keeps the entire image from smearing when your head moves, by forcing the eyes to move the other way. Vestibulo-Ocular Reflex. Why does the world stay still when your head is moving? Because your eyes are quietly moving in the opposite direction. This is the Vestibulo-Ocular Reflex, or VOR, a stabilization system that reacts faster than vision alone could correct the image. Turn your head to the left, and the reflex drives your eyes to the right, keeping the same object centered on the retina. Without it, every footstep would make the world bounce like footage from a camera strapped to a running dog. The signal begins in the inner ear. Fluid shifts inside the semicircular canals when the head rotates, bending microscopic hair cells that detect the direction and speed of movement. The otolith organs handle a different problem: linear acceleration and the pull of gravity. Together, they tell the vestibular nuclei how the head is moving before the eyes lose their target. From there, the command reaches the eye muscles through cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6. The entire pathway can respond within milliseconds, producing a movement almost equal and opposite to the head turn. That relationship is called VOR gain. A gain near 1 means the eyes compensate closely for the head's motion. But the reflex is not frozen at birth. The cerebellum can recalibrate it when vision changes, which is why the nervous system can gradually adapt to new glasses or altered visual conditions. When the VOR weakens, walking may make signs blur, faces shake, and the room appear to jump. This is called oscillopsia. The world moves because the internal camera stabilizer has lost its grip. But the next reflex does not stabilize what you see. It guards the entrance to your airway, and strangely, some healthy people barely show it at all. Gag Reflex. A missing gag reflex does not automatically mean the airway is unprotected. That is the twist. The gag reflex is a pharyngeal defense response, but it is not the same thing as swallowing, coughing, or safely keeping food out of the lungs. Touching the back of the throat can trigger sensory signals through the glossopharyngeal nerve, while motor output travels mainly through the vagus nerve to contract the pharyngeal muscles. The result may be a sudden lift and squeeze of the throat, sometimes followed by retching. But the reflex varies dramatically between healthy people. Some show a powerful response. Others show almost none and still swallow normally. That makes gagging a poor standalone test of whether someone can protect the airway. Think of it as one guard at the entrance, not the entire security team. Swallowing uses a broader sequence. The tongue moves material backward, the soft palate closes the nasal passage, the larynx rises, the vocal folds close, and the upper esophageal sphincter opens. The cough reflex provides another layer if material reaches the wrong place. The gag reflex may join that defense, but it does not command the whole operation. It can also become oversensitive. Dental tools, strong smells, anxiety, or even anticipation may trigger it before anything dangerous reaches the throat. That reaction is real, not dramatic behavior. The nervous system is simply setting the boundary too far forward. Slow nasal breathing, clear communication during procedures, and gradual exposure may help in non-emergency situations. But if something slips past this first guard, the next reflex does not squeeze the throat. It turns the chest into a pressure cannon. Cough reflex. The lungs do not have hands, so they defend themselves with pressure. When liquid, smoke, mucus, or a foreign particle irritates the larynx or lower airway, sensory fibers carried mainly by the vagus nerve send an alarm to the brainstem. What follows is not one explosive breath. It is a timed sequence. First, you inhale. Then the vocal folds close, trapping air inside the chest. The abdominal and respiratory muscles contract against that sealed opening, building pressure behind the glottis. Then the gate opens. Air tears outward at high speed, dragging mucus and unwanted material with it like a pressure washer clearing a blocked pipe. The detail most people miss is that coughing has two jobs. It can react instantly to an irritant, but it can also be partly controlled. You can suppress a cough during a quiet meeting or produce one deliberately because higher brain regions can influence the brainstem circuit. That control has limits. When the airway senses enough danger, the protective command can overpower politeness. A weak cough creates the opposite problem. If the vocal folds cannot close properly, the respiratory muscles are weak, or the nervous system cannot coordinate the sequence. Pressure never rises enough to clear the airway. But an oversensitive system can turn harmless talking, cold air, or perfume into repeated coughing, long after the original trigger is gone. In that case, the alarm may be reacting to a memory of irritation rather than a new blockage. The cough reflex protects each breath after something enters the wrong passage. The next reflex works before you notice any danger at all, correcting your heartbeat every time gravity pulls blood away from the brain. Baroreceptor Reflex. Stand up too quickly and gravity drags blood toward your legs before your brain has time to complain. Yet most of the time, you do not collapse. The baroreceptor reflex is already correcting the pressure. Stretch sensitive receptors in the carotid sinus and aortic arch. Monitor how strongly each pulse expands the artery wall. They are not measuring blood volume directly. They are reading tension, like fingers pressed against a garden hose, judging pressure from how hard the wall pushes back. When blood pressure drops, those receptors fire less often. Signals traveling through the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves reach the nucleus tractus solitarius in the medulla, which shifts the balance of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic output rises. The heart beats faster and more forcefully, while blood vessels tighten to push blood back toward the brain. When pressure rises, the pattern reverses. Parasympathetic activity slows the heart, and sympathetic drive falls. The strange part is that this reflex does not defend one perfect number. It resets. Exercise, posture, stress, and even sustained changes in blood pressure can move the operating range. allowing the system to keep working under different conditions. That flexibility is useful, but it also means the reflex can adapt to a pressure that is not healthy over the long term. If the response is too slow or too weak, standing may cause dizziness, blurred vision, or fainting, because the brain briefly loses adequate blood flow. The correction usually happens so quietly that you never notice it. Every time you rise, the body runs a pressure test, adjusts the pump, and squeezes the pipes before your vision begins to fade. But the final reflex does something even stranger. It slows the heart while tightening blood vessels at the same time, and cold water on the face can switch it on. Mammalian dive reflex. Cold water touches the face, breathing stops, and the body quietly changes its priorities. The heart slows while blood vessels in the limbs tighten, preserving circulation for organs that cannot tolerate oxygen loss for long, especially the brain and heart. This is the mammalian dive reflex, an ancient survival response shared in different strengths across diving mammals and humans. Cold-sensitive signals from the face travel mainly through the trigeminal nerve into the brainstem. The response then splits in two directions. Parasympathetic output through the vagus nerve produces bradycardia, reducing the heart's oxygen demand. At the same time, sympathetic activity constricts peripheral blood vessels, redirecting blood away from the skin and limbs. Two systems often described as opposites are activated together. One presses the brake on the pump, the other narrows the outer pipes. Seals can use this response dramatically during long dives. In humans, it is weaker and more variable, but facial cold combined with breath holding usually produces a stronger response than breath holding alone. The forehead, eyes, and upper face are especially important trigger zones because of their trigeminal sensory supply. But this is not a secret switch that creates unlimited underwater endurance. Cold water shock can initially cause gasping and rapid breathing, while the competing effects of sympathetic activation and a slowing heart may place unusual stress on cardiac rhythm in susceptible people. It should never be treated as a reason to extend a breath hold underwater. Your body does not become a seal when your face meets cold water. It simply begins rationing oxygen, slowing the pump, closing the outer roads, and protecting the rooms that must stay lit. Which sign surprised you most? Tell us in the comments, and stay tuned for the next video by liking and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for watching.